and welcome to a new Getting to Know Japan webinar. Thank you for joining us, and a big thank you to our program sponsor, the Japan Foundation in New York, for funding this series and enabling us to put this on each week. Today, we are joined by Dr. Jessamyn Abel, who will be presenting on Dream Super Express, a cultural history of the world's first bullet train. Just a kind reminder to refrain from turning on your microphones during the duration of today's presentation and recording. Dr. Jessamyn Abel is a College of Liberal Arts Endowed Fellow, Associate Professor in the Asian Studies Department, and affiliated faculty of the School of International Affairs at Pennsylvania State University. She's a historian of modern Japan with interest in democratization, technology, infrastructure, sports, and international relations. Her current research focuses on post-war Japan to examine the role of large institutions in promoting democratic practices and attitudes. Dr. Abel, it is a pleasure to have you with us here today. I will let you take it from here.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for having me. I will begin, of course, by sharing my screen so you can all look at the pretty pictures that I've selected. The Dream Super Express of the title of my talk today, and as you can see here, the title of this book that I published a couple of years ago, refers, as many of you probably know, to the new Tokaido line, the first bullet train in Japan that opened on October 1st, 1964. And at the time, it was the world's fastest regularly scheduled passenger train. And as the world's fastest, it really captured imaginations, both in Japan and around the world. And the bullet train has been called in many different contexts a symbol of Japan. In this instance that I have up on the screen here, by JR Central promoting the bullet train to an international audience, clearly with this English language advertisement. And you can see JNR here using some of the symbolism that it's kind of a preview for other parts of the talk. Of course, the sleek, modern-looking bullet train there, but behind that, Mount Fuji, always a very reliable symbol of Japan. I think you can see it behind Ms. Kidd here in her screen, right? Yeah, there it is. Cranes flying off into the distance. So a lot of these sort of traditional symbols of Japan, but then here's the bullet train. What is it about the bullet train? And that's actually why I started researching it. I wanted to know, why is it such a powerful symbol? How did it become such a powerful symbol of Japan? And the answer that I found was that people filled it with meanings that mattered to them. So the bullet train embodied the nation of Japan or particular communities or even the self in different ways for different people. So by looking at the planning and construction and early use of the bullet train, we can really see not just a history of the bullet train itself, but a cultural history of a lot of important trends of the 1960s and early 1970s in Japan. So I want to just give you today a few examples, a handful of examples of different ways that people understood the train and kind of think about what that tells us about Japanese society of the time. And I want to start on a very small scale and very local context in Kyoto, because we can see in the struggles and debates about the placement of a bullet train station in Kyoto when the bullet train was being planned. We can see this as part of the post-war struggle over the definition and the practice of democracy at two levels, on both the local level and the national level, and how those intersected in Kyoto. Now, if you think back in retrospect, it really seems unquestionable that if you're going to build a new high-speed rail train line between Tokyo and Osaka, of course it's going to stop in Kyoto, right? One of the most important historical cities and a major tourism site. But in fact, in the 1950s and 60s, that was not a foregone conclusion. And in fact, there was a triangular tug of war among three groups: planners at Japanese National Railways, JNR. This is the public precursor to today's privatized JR companies. So this was a government agency. The second angle of this triangle was the Kyoto city and prefectural officials. And the third is the communities that lived and worked along the proposed and eventual route that the train took through Kyoto. And I'll start with the strongest corner of this triangle, and that is JNR. They began concrete planning in 1958, and at that time, they had conflicting goals. On the one hand, they wanted speed and safety to go as fast as possible without any accidents. And that meant they wanted the straightest line possible, because that would be the easiest, fastest, safest way to travel. On the other hand, they were looking at keeping construction costs low and keeping potential profits high. And that meant the profits angle certainly meant making the line convenient for travel, because you needed a lot of passengers in order to make the line profitable. And those conflicting goals led to some internal ambivalence about a Kyoto station within JNR. So on the one hand, some JNR leaders thought, well, Kyoto is so important for tourism that we have to have a station there. But others pointed out having a stop in Kyoto will add to the running time. They had not planned that initially. And they said, we've promised the Japanese public this is going to be 3 hours from Tokyo to Osaka, not 3 hours and 5 minutes. And adding a stop in Tokyo would push us over that 3-hour limit. In addition, they predicted correctly, it turns out, that it would be very difficult to obtain land in Kyoto City because it was already so densely built up. So the first plan that JNR proposed, and you can see a couple of plans on this map that I have here on the screen. The two lower dotted lines were the two of the first ideas that JNR presented. And then the third, the double dotted line, is the third possible route of the three that they first considered. So you can see, if you look at this one that goes through Suzuka Pass and this one that goes through Happu Pass through the Suzuka Mountains, it was not even going to go anywhere close to Kyoto. Certainly wasn't going to have a stop anywhere in Kyoto. Those two plans were rejected fairly early on, because as JNR started doing some investigations, they found that the land quality in certain parts of the route were not strong enough to support high-speed rail. So they set those two aside and focused on this upper dotted line, double dotted line. But you can see even this one passes quite far south of Kyoto Station. And so they thought, if we're going to have a stop in the Kyoto vicinity, it certainly won't be by the existing Kyoto Station, which is this dot here, and it certainly won't be a super express. It would just be the regular express train that would stop at 10 different places, and there would be no super express stops between Nagoya and Osaka. And so when JNR made that announcement in November of 1959 that was the basic route that they were going to go for, that really set the leadership in Kyoto, both in Kyoto Prefecture and in the city, into motion, because they suddenly realized, oh, wait, there might not be a bullet train stop in our city, and we really need it. And so that brought an intense campaign by Kyoto political and business leaders to attract the new Tokaido line to Kyoto, to the existing Kyoto station. And that is the second strongest point in that triangular tug of war that I was telling you about. And the bullet train became a key element in efforts by the local administrations in Kyoto to rebrand their city through a set of urban development plans, of which the bullet train would be a part. And the stakes for them were not just an anticipated boost to the local economy, but they really focused on the potential of Kyoto to promote this multifaceted effort to remake and rebrand the ancient capital as not just the ancient capital and the repository of traditional cultures, but also as modern and futuristic, as they called it in the phrase of the time, an international culture tourism city. And that plan gave the train kind of an outsized role in determining Kyoto's future. So, for instance, in October 1958, this is just before that route was announced, they were already trying to talk to JNR about their plans, and the policy committee dedicated to policy related to JNR within the Kyoto City Assembly made this decision. They said, if the bullet train does not come through here, Kyoto will inevitably fall to the level of a second-rate city. On the other hand, if it stops at the existing Kyoto station, it will be an opportunity to realize our goal of having elevated tracks. So we must put all our strength into attracting it. Right? So the idea is that JNR was either going to condemn the city to second-tier status, or it was going to help them achieve these existing goals that they had, including the elevation of the existing Tokaido line. But to convince JNR to stop at the existing Kyoto station, they needed an argument that would appeal to the agency's own institutional interests. And because it was a national agency and a national project, Japan's national interests. So they presented an argument that Kyoto City is a representative of Japan. It is Japan's representative city and the world's window on Japan because of this combination that they were trying to sell, that it is not only the repository of traditional culture, but also this home of contemporary technology with modern infrastructure in the home of the ancient capital. And so they said, therefore, a stop on this national project bullet train is essential and beneficial to the nation because foreigners are going to want to go there. And so there was a lot about how Japan looked to the rest of the world. And this rhetoric was very convincing to JNR, as those of you who have ridden the Tokaido Shinkansen know, the fastest super express does stop there, and it is at Kyoto Station. But how pervasive was this image of Kyoto among its citizens? Of course, building a new infrastructure through a densely populated city means that some people will have to sacrifice more than others. And the Kyoto leadership's so-called international culture tourism city identity was less relevant to those for whom the personal costs were going to be highest. And that is people who would be evicted from their homes and businesses or condemned to life under the shadow of these elevated tracks of the bullet train. For instance, people here in Yakatacho, east of Kyoto Station by the Kamo River, people in Minami Ward, including this shrine, which currently the bullet train passes right over it. People in Hachijo, south of the existing station, whose homes and businesses had to be, many of them were evicted to make room for the new platform that they built for the bullet train. So the celebrations of the municipality's success in bringing the Super Express to Kyoto, which was ubiquitous, really obscures this other side, the protests and hardships and losses by people for whom the bullet train actually meant more harm than benefit. And for them, the bullet train was not this symbol of modernity and an international city, but rather an emblem of their own continued powerlessness within the new democratic system of Japan. And the local communities most adversely affected by bullet train construction were some of the most economically and politically marginalized people of Kyoto. The land for the tracks and for the expansion of the station was located in very poor districts where the residents were unlikely to use the bullet train once it was built, but they were being called upon to sacrifice the most for its construction. And so Certainly, they may have been excited about the concept of their nation having the world's fastest train, and many of them were willing to contribute to a major national project. But it was that unfair distribution of costs and benefits that was really very hard to accept for many of the people who were being evicted or whose communities were being directly affected. And that reality inspired many people to enter into new modes of political participation and activism. And part of the reason for that is the legal context in which the government had a very strong right, and a right that was strengthened during the time that the bullet train was being planned, to expropriate land by force, right? They didn't have to have people agree to sell their lands. They could insist that people sell them and force them to do so. So that was part of it. The other part of it is that local communities did not enjoy much local government support. As I just explained, the local government was very much in favor of this project, and they just wanted to sort of bend over backwards to make sure that JNR did not change their minds. And so they were a little hesitant to help those communities that were being hurt by this. And so what some communities decided to do was to go outside of the official democratic system, and to some extent take matters into their own hands through protests and through demonstrations. And it's very hard to see this in the historical record because the communities who are being affected, for the most part, did not record their thoughts and experiences. So you can only see it sort of sideways from other sources. There are a lot of references to these protests in the official municipal government reports. There are not a lot of details, but you can see the outline of what kinds of protests there were. But one source that I found to be very useful was a memoir of a lawyer who advised one group that was seeking compensation. And his name was Nakabo Kohei. He was a lawyer in Osaka, and he later became quite famous representing the victims of the Morinaga milk poisoning that took place in 1973. And much later, at the end of a long career of this kind of fight for underdogs against powerful institutions, Nakabo wrote his memoirs, and he included there the story of his experience with some shop owners in Kyoto fighting for their rights against JNR as the origin of his career arc. So it was these folks who kind of inspired him, he said, to take on this life of fighting for the little guy against the big guy. And one of this centers around the issue of buying land that I mentioned earlier was very difficult for JNR. People would hold out for a higher price. There were just a lot of people that they had to negotiate with. But many of the residents and shopkeepers around Kyoto Station could not hold out for a higher price because they rented space. So the person from whom they rented got compensation, but they did not. And when pressed, JNR did offer some compensation to the eviction of renting shopkeepers. But it was apparently very little and was deemed completely inadequate. And so one of these groups sought help from Nakabo. He looked at the materials and said, JNR has not done anything illegal. There's no legal base for opposition. But he says he suddenly was inspired, acting on instinct, he says, to suggest, why don't you have a sit-in? He said as a lawyer, he had no experience or knowledge of this, but he was feeling angry because recently the head of land purchasing in the Kyoto area had been arrested for corruption. And so reading about that, he really had a strong sense of JNR as guilty, the guilty party, and this feeling of wanting to protect the rights of leaseholders who had been injured by that kind of collusion. And so he thought this is a way of kind of making democracy work for the people, the little people, against powerful institutions like JNR. And he wrote in his memoir, by borrowing the strength of public opinion, the weaker party has a chance of winning. So it was his idea that we'll have a sit-in and it will bring attention to their situation and force JNR to give them a reasonable amount of compensation. So for Nakabal, working apart from the legal system and the democratic infrastructure was a way to make democracy real, to make it work for everyone, even the least powerful citizens of Kyoto. And looking at the longer trend of Japanese history, we can really see this kind of protest as part of the trend toward issue-specific citizens movements that was emerging at the time and that took on strength over subsequent decades. We can see subsequent protests increasingly, especially with the expansion of the Shinkansen system after that. For instance, this is an image of a protest in Saitama in the 1970s with the expansion of the bullet train line then. But there was also, on the other hand, the same kind of activism to attract stations. For example, some shopkeepers in the Ueno area of Tokyo campaigned very hard to have the Tohoku, the northward going bullet trains that exist now, Tohoku and Joetsu lines, to come to Ueno Station, because they thought that would help their shops, which had been suffering at the time. And again, they were successful. More recently, Kyoto officials have been using similar methods and similar rhetoric to their predecessors in their unsuccessful effort to have JR have a Kyoto stop on the linear, the maglev line that is being built. And this was a poster on the platform in Kyoto Station that I happened to see when I was there doing research on the 1964 bullet train. And here it's saying very much the same thing as we could see in the previous instance. For Japan's future, bring the linear, the maglev, to Kyoto, and using that same imaging of the very sleek, modern-looking maglev train with these traditional cultural elements that we associate with Kyoto, like the temples and shrines and fans and the like, cherry blossoms, of course. So that is one example of, or that's really three examples of the meaning of the bullet train and how different groups in that local context saw it differently. But if you zoom out a little bit from one specific city to the Tokaido as a whole, you can see that the construction and the early use of the bullet train also, on a regional scale, changed the ways that people saw the Tokaido region, this space between Tokyo and Osaka. And one element of that is this is a neighborhood of Tokyo that some of you may be familiar with. If not, you should check it out. It's a lot of fun. Yurakucho. And there we can see this over on the left. The bullet train is just, the tracks are being constructed here, and you can see they're blotting over an existing street. And here on the right, a test run of the bullet train a year later in July 1964. It's completely going right up to those trains. So it's really changed that space. New stations and platforms and tracks destroyed spaces, but they also, on the other hand, had prompted new uses of those spaces. So if you go to this neighborhood today, you can see tucked under the bullet train tracks a lot of little izakayas, pubs and restaurants. And that's one of the things that makes this neighborhood so much fun to go to. So it just changed the space. In some places, It actually changed the shape of cities in both Yokohama and Osaka. Bullet train stations were built outside of the existing city. So you can see this is an example of Shin Yokohama Station, new Yokohama Station. As it's being built, you can see that there are mostly agricultural lands surrounding it. And then on the right, you can see this is what that area looks like in more recent years. So if you go there today, it's yet another city center. So what was this port city has kind of been pulled inland and created a new second city center around Shin Yokohama Station. Pulling out again from a regional to a national level, the bullet train was part of what was being identified in the 1960s and 1970s as the informationization of Japanese society. This was a change in the Japanese economy and society from what was considered an industrial economy to an information economy. And we can see the bullet train being connected to this economic change in the claims of land planners who said, oh, the people are going to be able to move information so much faster between Tokyo and Osaka because the trains will go faster. They said, televisions and radios is not enough because that's one way. Telephones, sure, you can talk, but you really need to meet face to face to really do business. And so only a train is really going to be an information mover. And so with the speeding up of the train, many land planners said this is going to be part of the new information society of Japan. But it wasn't just in land planning documents and academics arguments, but you can see here in this example that I have up on the screen, it was also in popular culture. And this example is a movie called Shinkansen Daibakuha. It was released in the United States under the title Bullet Train in 1975. I really wanted to translate it as a big bash on the bullet train, but somebody convinced me that that sounded like a high-speed party. So I went with a big explosion on the Shinkansen, a little bit more boring, but maybe more accurate. And in this film, you can really see from, in this screenshot that I have here, there was a tremendous emphasis on the computerization of the train. So in some ways, it was a celebration of the computer high-speed information movement that made the train so effective and safe. But on the other hand, it also highlighted the economic and social disruptions that the train brought to Japan and that the information economy brought to Japan. Because in this movie, for instance, there is a bomb planted on a bullet train, and it is set to go off if the train falls below a certain speed. So that plot might sound familiar to you. It was the inspiration for the Keanu Reeves movie Speed that came out years later, decades later. Zooming out again from Japan as a nation to the East Asian region, the bullet train was also part of the 1960s rethinking of Japan's imperialist past. The announcement of the plan in 1959 brought a flood of reminiscences of two wartime railroad projects. One is the one that I have pictured here, the Asia Express in Manchuria, Japanese-occupied Manchuria, the puppet state of Manchukuo, which opened in 1934 and was a high-speed luxury train, much faster and more luxurious than anything in Japan. It was, at the time, the third fastest train in the world, so it was very impressive that it was on the level with European and American trains, which were the leaders in the world at the time. So that's one rail project that people started to remember and talk about a lot in both railway aficionado venues like magazines about railways, but also in popular culture stories and even a television show, a couple television shows actually. And the second project that people talked about a lot was the first, what would have been the first bullet train, a wartime plan to build a high-speed rail from Tokyo to Shimonoseki. Not quite at the speeds we have today, so it would have taken 9 hours to get from Tokyo to Shimonoseki, and it would have been part electric and part steam. They did not get to finish this project because as of 1943, the demand for all resources, both human and material, had to go to the war effort. So they put this project on hold, but certain parts of it, including the beginning of digging for the new Tanna Tunnel, were used for the actual bullet train, Tokaido bullet train that was built in 1964. And so that became part of a rethinking not only of Japanese empire, but also the wartime past in Japan. And there was a sense in the stories about these lines, these railway plans, of a sense of nostalgia for the past and a sense of connection with the prosperity that people were beginning to enjoy in the 1960s. Finally, zooming out to the global level, the bullet train featured in efforts to project a new national identity for Japan through public diplomacy. And one example of this, you can see pictured here, is the New York World's Fair Japan Pavilion. Here, you can see the name of the pavilion was, or the theme of the pavilion was the 1860s to 1960s, from feudalism to the edge of space. So the planners were really trying to emphasize the incredible leap forward technologically that Japan had made over the past 100 years. And they did that by having today's objects of industrial and technological success pictured against a background of images from the late Tokugawa period. And they said their goal in doing this was explicitly to eliminate what they called the Fujiyama geisha image. They said if Americans think of Japan, they think of Fujiyama. They have these romantic and exoticized images of Japan. And they said, we want to get rid of that. We don't want people to think of geisha when they hear the word Japan. We want them to think of high tech, right? We want them to think of successful industry. We want to build respect and appreciation for Japanese technology and layer that over those old images. They were not always successful because part of that plan involved also presenting those old images, and Americans were really enjoying that part of the presentation. And so in the reports of the Japan Pavilion, a lot of people were showing that they did not successfully change that image, but it was part of a new effort at Japan using its technology to present an international image. And one more example from popular culture. This one's a bit silly, but for those of you who like monster movies, the bullet train became a very prominent or very popular prop in monster movies, a really popular thing to have a monster destroy. And you can see here in Gamera the Giant Monster, the bullet train is one of many symbols of modern Tokyo that the monster destroys as it's plowing through Tokyo, looking for sustenance. It feeds on power. And this is also kind of a rethinking of Japan's international position, as if you watch the movie, and it's not a bad one, if you like monster movies, Japan is sort of presented as this one of the three major technological powers in the world, and playing an important mediating role in the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, the two nuclear powers. And so another way in which the bullet train is playing a role in this rethinking of Japan. The bullet train is still a symbol of Japan. It still means many different things for different people. And I know many of you are either in Japan or will be going there soon. So maybe you can take a ride on the bullet train and find your own meaning for any one of the many lines that are there now. And I will end there, and I hope to have some questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abel, for your wonderful presentation. So yes, let's begin the Q&A portion, if that's okay. Um, so with regards to the Tokaido line and the evolution of, the bullet train, obviously back in the 1960s, perhaps the goal was, to build up these towns, economically, and things of that nature. They probably didn't foresee that in the future, places like Kyoto would be, be a city in which it's now over, not overpopulated per se, but there's a lot of tourism. And sometimes there's tourism to the extent that a lot of people um, are getting kind of frustrated because you can't really enjoy Kyoto now without people everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, in your research, perhaps, and maybe this is something that's happened, then maybe in the last 10 years or so, are there now people who regret the Shinkansen, perhaps going through their city due to this, overwhelming amount of tourism in places like.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I'm sure there are people who wish the bullet train did not come there. But I do think that there's probably a very similar split in the city, insofar as, clearly the fact that as recently as I think it was 2015 when I was there doing research, and for a few years thereafter, the Kyoto government was really promoting the idea of having a stop on the maglev in Kyoto. So the fact that they were still trying to make sure that Kyoto was going to be on that transportation map meant that they really still, they didn't see it as a mistake yet. On the other hand, there are more and more voices saying this is not sustainable. We have to do something about this. Kyoto's in a tough spot because it is one of those places that definitely relies on tourism, but the over tourism is also detrimental. They ended up not getting a stop on the maglev, so I don't know if that will affect tourism to Kyoto. I suspect it won't, because I think people will still want to go to the ancient capital and see all these famous and important and beautiful spaces. And so I don't think the leadership is so concerned about presenting that dual image anymore. But it's certainly still part of it.
Thank you so much. The reason why this question came to mind is because I know, as you mentioned, the Shinkansen is a symbol of Japan. So is, Mount Fuji, and I believe last year last year there was talk about trying to reduce the amount of tourism and also people going to Mount Fuji because of the amount of trash and things of that nature. So I've kind of always wondered, is this a thing that would happen that would extend to other symbols of Japan, essentially, in which tourism has become a problem? Though there's a lot of economic benefits, it does begin to become unsustainable, as you mentioned.
Yeah, certainly. And even I climbed Mount Fuji when I was, I don't know, I think I was 20 years old or something. So it was a long time ago. And already it was jam-packed with people. I couldn't believe it was sort of a traffic jam going up a mountain. And that's apparently nothing to what it is now. So they really do need to do something about that.
Thank you so much. So the next question that I wanted to ask pertains to, as you mentioned, presenting an international image. So I've always wondered why hasn't, maybe I'm just I don't have that much knowledge about Shinkansen, but why has Japan taken this kind of technology and gone to other places and helped to set up maglevs or these kinds of train, transportation systems in other countries. I know that other countries have been influenced by it, like China and India, and they've perhaps, been able to not take, but observe Japanese technology and apply it to their own transportation system. But why hasn't Japan been able to essentially monopolize on this kind of, technology, essentially?
Well, they certainly tried to. That was, and for a long time, and even very recently, the government has really promoted the effort to export the Shinkansen to other countries. And the Japanese government does join bids to build high-speed rail in other countries, certainly in Southeast Asia. They have in, I believe it was Taiwan, they were involved in building that rail quite some time ago. And China is a competitor now. Oftentimes it's those two head to head, but also many of the European countries have their own excellent technology. So they are in competition. Just because they were first didn't keep them necessarily on top. But if the Chuo Maglev eventually gets built, and I'm not sure if it will get completed, but if it does, that's supposed to be, again, the fastest train in the world. So maybe that'll help with those efforts. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Thank you so much. So now moving on to questions in the chat. So David Fitzgerald asked, Mishima Station on the Kodama Shinkansen was considered a political gift to local leaders. Has it ever developed the area around it? Is it a failure?
I don't think it's a failure. Certainly the area around it did develop. You're talking about Gifu Hashima Station, right? Even at the time, there was some mixed feelings about that. There were some people who said this is a great boon for our area. Others who felt pressured to sell their land said this has been a disaster. We didn't want to sell our land and we felt we had to. There was one interesting television show called Dangan Resha, Bullet Train, that aired on NHK in 1964 for, I think there were 10 episodes running up to August 1964. And one episode was about Gifu Hashima Station, and it depicted two families that made different decisions about selling their land and what happened to them as a result. And the one that refused to sell was happy in the end, and the one that had sold regretted it. And I just found that very interesting, that at the time the train was being built, this very popular show on Japan's national broadcasting channel was depicting that as a disaster. But it's never unmixed, right? So there were certainly people who benefited from that, and it is much more developed and built up than it was at the time. It was really not much of anything at the time. There were actually around Gifu Hashima Station several competing voices. One of the reasons that it is considered a political station is that they were there were so many different parties trying to either attract the station or push it away, that ultimately they asked Ono Banboku, who was a very strong, prominent politician from the region, you just decide and we'll go with that. And he said, okay, we want it here. And JNR explained in that television show and elsewhere, oh, well, there are actually reasons for having a station in Gifu for this reason and that reason. And they argued that it was not a political station, but others interpret it differently.
I do want to clarify, the station that was mentioned in the original question is Mishima Station.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misheard. But at any rate, Gifu Hashima is one that I know specifically about. Mishima Station, I don't know much about specifically, but certainly there were a few examples of that kind of, especially with Tanaka Kakue saying, okay, let's build this here. Let's build a line out to Niigata. That's a whole political line in some estimations. So there's always, it's very hard to kind of put your finger down and say, oh, this is definitely only political, or there's actually a reason for this, and this was detrimental, or this was beneficial. It's never that clear cut.
Thank you so much. The next question comes from Amit Newfield. What are the main engineering qualities that contribute to the train being so fast?
The engineering. Well, there are many elements. It's interesting that the bullet train was not sort of a technological leap. It was actually a combination of many different existing technologies that were in use on various trains, and they put them together in a really good, powerful way to make it that fast. So it wasn't like they were inventing some amazing new technology. There were absolutely new developments, but some of them were already in existence in other trains. So for instance, longer rail pieces, right? That there were actually longer pieces to the rail made it so it was a smoother ride. Better tunnel technology meant that they could make a straighter line because they could tunnel through mountains. So where the train would have had to curve, a curve means you have to slow down. Now they can go straight because they can blast through a mountain. Not only does that make the route shorter, it also means that the train can move faster. Well, one of the problems with these long tunnels was they found if the train blasts through the tunnel at that high speed, people's ears hurt because the air pressure changes. So they figured out, oh, we actually have to seal up every car and make it airtight for that moment before it enters the tunnel so that people's ears don't hurt. And they added that to the train because of these test runs that they did. And so, I mean, I can't list them all. It's just many different small things that made for a safe, fast, comfortable ride.
Thank you so much. The next question comes from Joshua Palamo. How was the bullet train, aka Shinkansen Daibaku, related to the real life technology of the bullet train in Japan?
Oh, thank you for that question, because I kind of skipped that part. It's related very closely because in 1972, they installed something called ComTrack, which was a computerized way of tracking every train up and down the line. And the line had been extended at that point. The part of the Sanyo line had been built. And so that computerization was very exciting because it was very new. And then in 1975, the computer system was updated. So it was a newer computer system, and the Sanyo line extended to Hakata. And so in the movie, they have that very high-tech computerized system. And that's what you were seeing on that screenshot that I showed you with all the huge board at the headquarters in Tokyo showing where every train on at every station on both lines is at the moment, and they can instruct them from Tokyo, say, okay, you have to get off on this side, and electronically. They don't have to pick up the phone and tell them, they can do it electronically via the computer. And so much of that automated element is part of what is being shown off in this movie, but it's also the downfall. It's the Achilles heel of JNR because it's the automated features that make it so hard for them to disarm the bomb. They say, okay, well, they can't just stop the train. They say, okay, well, let's open up one of the doors, and we can get another train alongside and have everyone get off the train. Well, no, if a door opens, the computer notices and it sees that's a problem and it automatically stops the train, right? So all those automated elements make it really hard for the people to stop this bomb from going off. So it's a major plot element in the movie that the Shinkansen, it's so safe and so automated, and safe because it's automated, but in this one instance, it's the automation that's really making it dangerous.
Very interesting. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So the next question comes from Tuan Tran Tue. So the Shinkansen train is considered a pride of Japan, but currently the Shinkansen is also facing fierce competition with the aviation industry, especially low-cost airlines and long routes. Can you give your thoughts and assessments on this and the future of the Shinkansen in Japan? Thank you so much.
Well, that's not a new thing. They were thinking about aviation industry and rail industry were definitely thinking about each other at the time that the new Tokaido line was being built. The JNR was very conscious of being fast enough and cheap enough that it would be worth taking the train instead of just flying. Why not just fly? Because at the same time, actually just a few months before the bullet train opened, the monorail to Haneda Station opened. And so it was suddenly much easier to get to the airport from the center of Tokyo. So people thought, oh, everyone's going to just take the monorail to Haneda and you can fly to Osaka very quickly. So we have to make it easier and fast and cheap for people to do that on the train, so that they do. And at the same time, the airline industry was a little bit worried, oh, this is going to be competition for us. And so what are we going to do about that? Whether I think trains will continue to be competition for planes in Japan, at least for those shorter distances. If you want to go from Hokkaido down to Kyushu, maybe you're just going to get on an airplane. But for the smaller distances, I think the bullet train is probably still going to be many people's choices, just because it's easier. And you don't have to go through all the airport security and everything that takes a lot of extra time. So when you factor in all the time of getting to the airport, going through security, waiting, and then your plane is delayed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I think a lot of people just say, oh, we'll take the train.
So similar to that question, William Downey asked or said the price of the JR pass increased dramatically this year. As the population continues to decrease and shift to major urban centers, how will this impact Japan's train strategy?
I have been wondering that myself, and it is something that I have not researched, because I haven't been researching the bullet train since that happened. But I was kind of wondering why they did that, and I don't know the answer. I think it will, for some people, change the calculus of whether they're going to take a bullet train ride. For those for whom it would have been marginal, they might make a different choice. They might take a different trip, right, and not go to Osaka, but instead maybe just go to somewhere closer by. In terms of Japan's strategy, things might change if they manage to get the maglev through. I think, again, there will be excitement about that line for at least some time. They are always trying to create excitement for different lines, drumming up reasons for people to ride by putting some special artwork on the outside of the train, right? Oh, there's a Hello Kitty train, there's a Pikachu train, right? I want to ride that. Or special things like one of the north-going bullet trains has a foot bath that you can put your feet in some hot water while you ride. I haven't ridden that one, so I can't speak much about that, but just these little gimmicks to try to get people back onto the train. I think that's the reason they do that. It's tough.
Do you have any thoughts on the rising prices of the Shinkansen?
Well, just what I said, that it's going to make some people who were maybe going to ride decide not to, right? Because if you're like, oh, I can just about afford a bullet train ticket, then you're going to change your mind once that's much higher. It'll probably change the class of people who economic class of people who are able to ride the bullet train, and so it contributes to the inequality of society, and so that's unfortunate. I don't know if it'll impact tourism. You know, one of the things that is that a lot of tourists like to do is to get that pass, and they can travel around a lot, and that makes a kind of a bigger sightseeing tour easy. That's something that JNR was promoting about the bullet train from the 1960s on. They've been saying, "Oh, come to Japan and ride the bullet train, and not only do you get to see more places because it moves so fast, you get the excitement of riding the bullet train." So it wasn't just a means of transportation, it was a sight to see in and of itself.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time, but I would like to get to, if it's okay, can I ask maybe two more questions?
Sure.
Thank you so much. The next question comes from Florian Philo. Did you see the current Japanese maglev train, or do you see the Japanese maglev train as part of a competition with what China accomplished in Shanghai?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I really think that there was this sense I, in let me start over with that answer. I think in general, in many places that there's something about infrastructure that is not just about the the job that it was made to do, but there's also what some scholars of infrastructure studies call an aesthetic function, really like kind of the way people feel about a piece of infrastructure. And I think trains and the bullet train, high-speed rail in particular, people are excited about it. And there are bragging points to be had with being the country with the fastest train in the world. And so there's something to be said for having the fastest train in the world. China has a lot of superlatives right now. They have the most high-speed rail in the world. They have the highest rail bridge. They have a lot of the sort of superlatives related to not just rail, but other infrastructures. And so I think having the new world's fastest train could be a way for Japanese rail to get back on that record board.
Thank you so much. And the final question comes from Gen Narui. What made you study and publish a book about Shinkansen?
Well, it was a fun topic, so that was part of it. But it was really, I started researching this when I was working on my first book was about international relations and public diplomacy from the 1930s to the 1960s, and the Tokyo Olympics was the end point of that first book. And researching the Tokyo Olympics, I kept seeing a lot of references to the bullet train because it opened just a little over a week before the Tokyo Olympic opening ceremonies in 1964. And there was just so much sort of breathlessly excited reporting on it. And I was thinking, well, it's just a train, right? This is the jet age, almost really the space age. Why are people so excited about a fast train? And I just wanted to know the answer to that question. So it was really just to find out, why are people so excited, that I started researching this. And the more I got into it, the more I began to see, wow, it really is something that is in many ways representative of Japanese society, but so many different aspects of Japanese society. So it ended up being, I didn't know it would be a book, but it it ended up being a book.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abel, for taking the time to answer a lot of our questions. Thank you to our audience. I apologize we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but I will be sure to pass all the comments and questions on to Dr. Abel so she's able to see them as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So this concludes the Q&A portion. So thank you once again, Dr. Abel, for your presentation today and taking time out of your day to be with us. And once again, thank you to our program sponsors, the Japan Foundation New York. Once again, I want to say thank you everyone for joining us this week. We hope you'll join us next week for the final Getting to Know Japan webinar for the fiscal year. Thank you once again, Dr. Abel. We really appreciate your time and your great energy and your kind answers to all of our questions. Thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. We hope to see you next week. And I also want to really quickly thank you, Gabriella, for helping me. She's been helping me, and her and Jeff have been helping me all year. So I want to thank and acknowledge her for her support. Yeah, I appreciate it. Bye.